All right, recording in progress. So then, let's start now, and I can invite people in as we need to. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining myself and Bud this evening. We were hoping to run a training weekend, hike and fly training weekend, first of its kind this weekend, and I know a few of the guys were hoping to attend that to prepare for the X Lakes, and so I felt we had a duty to give them something in preparation for the lakes, and when we advertise that, obviously there's a little bit more interest as well. So here we go. A couple of presentations then, one from myself. So this is just a little bit of a, it's very quick brush up of what we were hoping to cover during the training weekend in terms of briefing. So it's going to be a bit from me, and then we're going to get to the meat and veg, which is going to be Bud, and he's going to talk to us about the Lake District being a local and racing the X Lakes. So quick introduction from myself then. My name's Dan. I've obviously probably met quite a few of you at races as well. You might see me advertising various bits as well on Telegram. I'm trying to push along the concept of hike and fly training in the UK. I'm also on the South East Wales Hang Gliding and Paragliding Committee as the hike and fly committee member, which is where I find my momentum to do this. Then we've got Bud, who I'm sure a lot of you know, and I'm sure he'll introduce himself when it gets to his bit. But obviously, Bud is quite a hike and fly pilot himself, having won various races, X Scotia, X Lakes, and also raced in the X Pira. So lots of experience there in Bud, and also he's also local to the lakes. So he's our guru to tell us about flying in the Lake District. So a quick thing for me then, I want to just promote the hike and fly training concept, why we're doing it, and where do we want to go with it. Ultimately, we want to progress hike and fly in the UK. We want to focus hike and fly so that we aren't just racing, because at the moment we only have a race calendar, but actually have some dedicated training, be it based around races and based around briefs, debriefs, and getting together and actually analysing what we do, teaching and learning from each other, because we're building up a huge amount of experience now in the UK, in European races and British races, and it's a shame not to work with that and share it. What we'll be looking to do with our training is teach methods, techniques, and to prepare UK pilots for both UK races, whether you're just starting out, or European races. Personal note from myself, I put European races in bold there because I've been flying Borns to Fly now for five years, and I have a personal goal that I'd like to have more British pilots out there racing with me in the Borns or Chablais. Obviously, Bud and Westy have raced in the Eiger Tour, and we have people like Paul Bingham doing a lot of the board air races. If you're not familiar with board air races, that's another format, and I know Paul's going out in 3 weeks to go and do another one in Austria. So for personal note, I'd like to see more British pilots getting out to European races, so there's more of us involved. The whole concept is we're developing ourselves to be thinking hike and fly pilots, being aware of ourselves, the fatigue, the psychology of racing as well. And because hike and fly ultimately does present another level of risk to a normal day out when it comes to paragliding. So that's where we're going with the hike and fly training, and I hope there's value in it for everybody and you might all join us. For me then, for this presentation, quick scope, I'm going to look at planning, how I approach planning a day, and others might have different opinions on this. This is purely my take on it. How I break down a hike and fly day. I'll talk a bit about my moving on the ground, a bit about flying. I'll look a bit at kit. That's not particularly, I'm just looking briefly at some stuff I've used in the X Lakes competitions as a Volviv pilot before, which I found useful. And then I'm going to briefly touch on fatigue and psychology. And then we'll look at the Lake District with Bud. So then into it, planning. I break the day down, I break planning down into three components. So this is how I build my model for the day. The first component I look at is the weather. Obviously, this might be apparent to everybody. I look at the weather and I use it to identify key times in the day. And I'll talk about my hike and fly day shortly. I then look at terrain. So I'm looking at sites, access, looking at aspects, what's going to be flyable, crux points, things that might catch you out in a hike and fly day, because a task is set, and not necessarily a waypoint bagging task, but maybe a waypoint task. There will be crux points in it that will catch people out. There might be times in the day you'll be able to get through it, or just tricky sections, and also dangers as well. Dangers that might be presented as a result of weather, or maybe, you know, crossing rivers or power lines or whatever it might be, or unlandable areas. So that's terrain. And then finally, the final component I look at for planning is myself. So how am I on the ground and how am I in the air? So let's look at each of those individually. Weather, so I say it's fairly obvious. Study the forecast, and we're looking for weather windows. We're looking for the key time of the day, which is when the day becomes XC flyable. In the British flying, we might find that we can ridge soar throughout the day, which is fine. But we're also starting to think about alpine flying and flying in Europe. We're studying the forecast, and what we're going to try and do with this forecast is identify our key time, which is the start of the XC flying day. Watch the guys in the X-Alps at the moment. You can see they're all doing exactly the same thing. We're going to use this time and this weather window that we identify to generate the schedule for the day. Using that, we're going to then start looking at the terrain. So study the maps, and I'd say going into the lakes, if you're not familiar with the lakes or any race you go to, study the maps, get your maps out and have a good look at them. One good technique is just mental model, just shut your eyes or put the map away and try and draw the key features of an area. So if you're going to the lakes, you know, Helvellyn Ridgeline, Scafell Pike, etc. So you can just visualize where everything is. Then have a look at access. How are you going to access these routes? Thinking about aspects, and I know I'm not going to step on Buzz's toes because he knows far more about the lakes than me, but he will talk about classic soaring lines as well. There might be some crux points to look at as well within the terrain, things are going to catch you out, and there might also be dangers, areas that you don't want to go to for weather or because you can't land there or whatever it might be. So you're going to start to study the terrain. So looking at your weather, you've got your time, you know which aspects you want to look for. And now we're looking at our terrain to try and build up an idea of where's suitable to go. Classic flying routes, obviously fairly useful to know. Bud will touch on those for the lakes. I write scale. So scale is just get an idea when you're looking at your map, what you're actually looking at. It's all very well looking at big picture contours, but you need to have an idea that when you're trying to figure out a route, how far that actually is, because there's no point in going, oh, I'm standing here and I can see I need a westerly aspect, but it's 30 kilometers away. Just get a grasp of how big the area actually is. And then finally, mapping apps. You'll be using it on the ground, but become familiar with it, because this is going to be one of your key planning tools when you're on the ground. Set it up so that you can hover your little cursor around the terrain and you can identify elevation gains, and you can maybe put in a quick track and generate two very important pieces of information, which is total distance to somewhere and total climb. And those two bits are key for planning where you're actually going to get to. And then finally, the final component of the plan, which I look at, is myself. Knowing your own capabilities. Now, we're all very different, and it's not a competition about who can run faster or hike up a hill faster. It's about knowing what you're personally capable of. So some of the key details here is speed over the ground. Ideally, people going into it, and I might be teaching you to suck eggs on this, but speed over the ground is, for me, how fast can I move at an average pace if I just want to maintain this all day long, or at a pace that if I'm going to have to pick it up a little bit, how fast can I shift? And generally, for me, I'm looking at probably about 5 kilometers an hour. That's all right. Maybe on a long day, that might drop down to about 4.5 kilometers an hour. If, however, I need to pick up the pace, because when we start looking at the day, I need to get somewhere, as in a takeoff, I can maybe start to think, right, speed over the ground, I need to really ramp this up. So can I maintain 6K an hour hiking, or do I need to start maybe thinking about my ace of spades, my can I run? So running is something that comes up all the time, and we all suffer from it when people report on hike and fly races, because they say all we do is we run. They don't really understand the concept of this, because it's not possible for myself and for a lot of people to put a rucksack on your back and run for 14 hours in a day. That's not feasible, and you're not going to achieve it. But it is a tool that we might have to use at times. So how long can you run for? Now, personally, if I'm going to run with my rucksack, I wouldn't be looking at anything more than maybe 10, 15K. And I'm really pushing the boat out now. This is me getting somewhere. I need to be somewhere to take off. So those are my speed over the ground components. I'd say I'd normally move about 5 kilometers an hour. If I'm going to hike fast, that might be 6. And I can only really run for 12 to maybe 15 kilometers in a session. Then speed up the hill. So for those who have joined us on the training weekend group, one of the things I asked you to look at was just get an idea of your speed up a hill. This is a really useful bit of information when you're planning your day. For me, again, my personal figure is probably 500 meters in an hour. So that's me getting tired. I've got a rucksack on my back. I've been slogging at it for a couple of days. I've got another 500 meters. How long is it going to take? It's going to take me 1 hour. Have that time as another benchmark in your mind, 500 meters or whatever it might be for you. It doesn't matter what it is, but have that benchmark in your mind so when you're planning your day, you know what you can achieve. Total distance in a day, that's just kind of useful to know, but it's not particularly important. That's if the weather's poor and you're just covering distance. And finally, Volbiv, if you're carrying extra kit, you're not going to be able to move as fast because you are going to be hindered by it. If you're in the air, then all bets are in, but on the ground, being Volbiv does slow you down. And other important parts for this point of view is food and water. So you need to be disciplined about this, and a lot of people maybe aren't so much. We need to eat often and drink a lot. Personally, I will be eating every 20 to 30 minutes, and it might only be a handful of trail mix, or it might be, I don't know, a sausage roll, whatever it might be. Eat often, because that's what's going to keep you going, and this is how we're going to battle against fatigue, because fatigue is going to be our biggest threat in these races. Drinking, if you've got platypus, that's ideal, but obviously guys have different methods of carrying water. Just keep on drinking, keep on filling up, and get it wherever you can, because this is the fuel we need to keep ourselves moving and to battle fatigue. Fatigue being our biggest threat. So can you identify it in yourself? What are the signs of fatigue? Obviously you might start feeling physically tired, but it's mental as well. What's it going to do to your decision making when it comes to flying? So this is you. Those are my 3 points I start to look at when I'm trying to break down the day. Right, planning the day then. So I've got my 3 points: my weather, my terrain, and myself, and I'm now going to devise a plan. I'm starting with a schedule I've generated with the forecast, and that is, as I said, my key time in the day, when the day becomes XC flyable, when it's thermic and I'm going to expect to fly for a long time, and that's my aiming point. Based on that time, I'm going to identify my launch options, and I'm going to do that using the terrain and also my own capabilities, knowing that, say I've got 4 hours, if the race starts at 7 and it's not flyable until 11, I've got 4 hours to move, and I don't want to be moving too fast at this stage, maybe 4 or 5K an hour. I could maybe cover 20K during that period. So I try and identify some launches within that period, but the ultimate goal is to be on takeoff when it's flyable. Then, as I say, knowing your own capabilities, is this feasible? Figuring out how fast you're going to have to move, and also don't undersell yourself. If you think you can go further or there's a better option a bit further, then allow yourself to replan and do that. But don't be very disciplined on this launch time. Launch time is what's important. Then we look at our hike and fly day. So that's my planning. I've got my plan. I said I'm starting my race at 7 a.m. I've got 4 hours until it's flyable. So that's my flying window from 11. So the first part of the day is the start of the race, or the day to the flying day. Now this format generally follows the same theme. You hike and you glide, and that's what you do during that period. You might in the UK get to ridge shore, and you might in the Alps as well, but predominantly we're hiking and gliding during that period. But we're getting to take off. And again, I keep on drilling it home, but that's where we want to be. How fast we move on the ground is now determined by you, how far you've decided you're going to try and cover to get there on time. So, you know, if you're just going to take it nice and steady, you might just be moving at 4 kilometers an hour. It doesn't matter as long as you get to that good takeoff. However, if you decided actually your only option to take off is, I don't know, say 25 kilometers away, and we're talking alpine more, then than lakes here, you know you're going to have to move fast to get there, but your goal is to get to that takeoff. The first part of the day and the last part of the day are really your opportunities to conserve your energy, because then we're going to the second part of the day, which is the start of the flying. And this is the start of the window you've identified. You put all that effort and planning into getting there, whether you have to move fast or slow to get there. You've put all that effort to get into there. Now you're into that second part of the day. And this second part of the day lasts until the end of the flying day. So with this, we'll talk a bit about flying as well. I just say, prepare yourself mentally and physically and be patient with the flying. You don't want to be in a rush at this stage. If it doesn't quite start on time, unless you've got an obvious option to go and take off, be patient with it. Don't be the guy that takes off too soon and flies into the valley, because ultimately in these races, if you end up landing in a valley, and say in the Lake District where most climbs are maybe 700-800 meters, well, it might be a bit much, but it's going to take you an hour and a half to get to a takeoff. In the Alps, you could be 3 hours away from a takeoff, and that is a huge portion of that important part of the day that you've just sold by not being patient enough to wait to fly. If you make the mistake and you end up on the floor, there's only one speed really to move at, and that's fast. At this point, you've got to get your head down and move, because every minute that you're on the ground now is potentially another half a kilometer you could be covering in the air. So this is the period when you're losing out big gains by not being in the air. So I'd say that during the second part of the day, if you're on the ground, you move fast, and when it comes to the flying, you're patient and you get it right. Then you're into the third part. So the day's fizzled out a little bit. You know, again, ridge flying might still be possible in the lakes until nice and late, but the day's fizzling out. So we're now hiking and gliding again, back into that routine. But we're also planning, and Bud's going to drill this one home, I know he is, that we're thinking about tomorrow. You're thinking about your next day. Where do you want to be on the second part of tomorrow? So you've looked at the forecast, and you might have taken a moment at this point and gone, right, tomorrow's forecast, it looks like this, therefore I need to take off. You've looked around yourself and you've gone, right, the weather's this, the terrain is this, and I'm capable of, in the combination of tonight and tomorrow morning, 30 kilometers, and you've identified somewhere and you've started moving. So that's what you're doing in this third phase. You're thinking about tomorrow and getting yourself where you want to be for takeoff when the flying starts again tomorrow. Again, how fast you move, slow or fast on the ground, yeah, you manage that depending on where you've chosen. But again, this is your opportunity to conserve the energy. Now, probably everybody's watching the X-Alps at the moment. It's worth mentioning Paul Takis's move last night. So if you saw him, he was flying absolute blinder. He was leading, he got to the first turn point. And then at about 9 o'clock in the evening, 10 o'clock in the evening, he just stopped and he rested. And that was one hell of a disciplined move to do that when everybody else went past him. They all pulled night passes and they kept on going. And he went, nah, sod this, I can conserve at this point. And he went to bed. This morning he got up, took off and flew and caught up with the lead pack, who'd been marching all night on foot. And he's back with the lead gaggle. He's still with them now. He's up there with Duragatti and Maxime Pinot at the moment. But he conserved last night. He's like, sod it, I can quite happily just rest myself now. He probably got 9 hours sleep when the rest of them got 2. He's far better rested for it. And that advantage is not necessarily going to show today, but it will show in the coming days. If he keeps up that sort of structure to his race, he's going to have so much more energy and mental capability. But anyway, that's that. So this is your opportunity. You can conserve a bit in the morning, you can conserve a bit in the evening, but the second part of the day is your goal, and that's when you move fast. Right, flying. So again, this is my take on it, and there are much better pilots on here than me who might say differently, but I say BHPA advanced pilot ? So obviously BHPA syllabus doesn't really get into hike and fly and the sort of stuff we get up to, and we all know we get up to it. We launch in funny winds, we launch in tailwinds, we fly in funny areas. Doesn't really get covered by the syllabus, but what you need to do is make sure you keep it a normal day for yourself. And you can certainly improve your performance by training and going out on average days and setting yourself tasks and just trying to launch in funny conditions. But do what's normal to you and don't push the limit just because you're racing. Because again, this is where mistakes happen. Okay, you might see someone do something and think, oh, if they've done it, I'll do it. But if it doesn't feel normal, and it's just guts instinct, if it doesn't feel normal, don't do it. Okay. Flying, don't rush it. Stick with a routine. This is a fairly hot topic recently. So a routine before flying, make sure you go through the same thing and build up a routine. For me, I count myself in and out of my harness, or in my harness. So I go through and I count 7 points, which is my leg loops, my pod, my wing, chest, and helmet. And I count those, and they're the same points every time: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they're in, and that's done. I will always check which direction I'm rotating, and I only rotate one way, but sometimes if I land, it's gone the other way. I will always check that and make sure I rotate the same direction. So routine, and the routine is really, it's understated, because when you're tired, this is what's going to stop you from making errors, because we muscle memory that will pick up the errors that you're potentially going to be making. Before you fly, eat and drink. When you're flying, eat and drink. This is all brain power. I say put your flying hat on. It might be a metaphor for your flying helmet, but just for 5 minutes, maybe just stand there, look around you and observe, as an XC pilot would, what's going on around you, the birds, the other gliders and things. Just get that flying hat on you, because like I say, at that point when you take off, you want to be flying for hours. You don't want to be gliding to the valley floor. Don't launch too early. I think we've done that. Personally, I say be conservative in the air. It's the way I fly in these races. Get high, I scratch on things I can scratch on, and I take these opportunities to think and observe. If I'm moving at even 10 kilometers an hour over the ground, that's faster than me moving on foot. So I will take every opportunity I can just to conserve in the air, unless it's absolutely banging. It's obvious you should be moving fast and everybody else is. Just take it nice and easy, soar little ridges and just take your time. And if it looks like it's all just going, maybe you're going to shut down for 10 minutes, just land high. There's no harm in landing high, even just to have a think about what you're up to, or getting your map out and looking for the next series of waypoints you're going to go and get. Land high and have think, because that's much more valuable than being in the valley. Follow the gaggle. Yeah, why not? It's quite good fun to fly with the gaggle as well. Enjoy it. I know that when I'm racing, I can get red mist descending, and I'm just looking at the numbers and I'm focusing on what's not working. But the flights I've enjoyed the most, I've kind of forgotten about the race, and I've just got into enjoying what I'm actually doing. And final point on there is the difference between an XC comp task versus a hike and fly comp task. It's a mute point, but an XC comp, you get bussed up to a takeoff and told what's flyable. A hike and fly comp task, this is now entirely up to you. You don't get a bus, so you've got to use your legs to get there. And a task is set for 3 days. That whole task isn't flyable for 3 days. So this is now down to you to determine at what phase different parts of this task is flyable. And this is where we need to start thinking as hike and fly pilots from an XC comp, how it differentiates. It's our responsibility to get to the right place at the right time, and that not all parts of a task are flyable or safe at all times. So it's our judgment as well. A bit on planning on the hoof. Obviously, if you bomb or you fly further than you thought, or you didn't have any idea where you're going to go, you're going to have to plan on the hoof. And this is where knowledge of your mapping app is invaluable. So quick mapping using the mapping app. Talking to others around you. I certainly do it in Borns to Fly. I land in all sorts of funny places I've never been and have no idea where takeoffs are. So just talk to those around you. And also supporters. Now, supporters we will not look at too much now, but I'm going to hammer it home, and I think Darren Goodlad will probably join me in this. If we're going to start racing more in Europe, the discipline of a supporter is something we need to start taking more seriously in the UK, because it's absolute key to performing well. And if you look at the guys in the X-Alps now, they've got 3 or 4 of them. So that's something we can deal with later. Quick look at kit. This is just the odds and ends kit list that I've put together for guys who may be volbiving this weekend. dry underwear, dry socks, dry t-shirt, Ziploc bags for waterproofing, the tweezers for ticks, water tablets just to keep yourself going, USB cables because we're so dependent on the electronic devices we use. It's worth having two because if you break one, you're stuffed unless you can use your kit. Batteries, I work on 10,000 milliamp hour a day. Earplugs, really useful for if you're sleeping in a tent. If the wind's flapping your tent around or the sheep are out, that's going to spoil your sleep. What else in there? Vaseline for nasty places, but also anywhere that chase. So hips, use waistbands or feet, and the rest of the stuff's self-explanatory. Food is down to your personal preferences. Everybody's got their own preferences, and we can certainly talk about that another time, but I'm not going to press it now. Quick look at rucksack setup. Purely because of the fatigue point, people don't do this very well. It's what we're looking at. Yes, so the setup of the bag and how you carry the weight makes a huge difference on your ability to keep on moving all day long. So a couple of things to look at is get the center of gravity close to your body. You can do this by folding your glider 3 times as well. That really helps if you're not already doing it. Put your heavy items close to your body. Use the compression straps to give that bag some structure, because if it's floppy, all that weight's going on your shoulders. I'm saying get that weight onto your hips. And also, the final point is find the stabilizing straps and look at others as well. That picture top right, if I've got a cursor, there you go. These straps here always slip, and look at others. If that bag falls backwards, you lean forwards, and it might sound trivial, but if you carry on all day with that thing hanging backwards, it's going to be exhausting. So that's that. And then the final part from me is fatigue and psychology. So be aware of how the race is going to affect your judgment, whether it be that the red mist has descended or that you're tired and you're making poor decisions. It's certainly easy to push the limits because you're in a race. As long as you're aware of it and you know what you're up to and you're willing to walk away from it as well, that's fine. But that's the red mist. We can combat the fatigue by eating and drinking, planning well. If you plan to be on the right takeoff at the right time and not landing in a valley, that's going to certainly sort your fatigue out. And check yourself as well. You can talk to others, and I've done this in races before where it's been marginal, and I've said to other pilots, you know, just check me. Am I actually doing the right thing here? Is it flyable? Just to make sure that you're not making a silly decision. The final point here is the risk that I identify in waypoint bagging format competitions, and that is the concept that at the end of the race, if you don't make the goal, you don't get the points you've just spent 36 hours racing for, and this leads you into making poor decisions when you're probably at your most vulnerable because you're exhausted and you just want to get to goal. So just be conscious that in these races, the X Lakes, the X Scotia, etc., there's this threat at the end of the race that you could just be boxing yourself into a corner that might lead you to making a silly decision. I think it's just worth having it in the back of your mind. We can mitigate that risk though by either one, just not worrying about it, and if we have to walk away from it, then fine. Or number two, and Bud's going to talk about this now, is planning it correctly. So if you can plan these races so you don't box yourself into the corner. I've done it before in X Lakes. I've boxed myself into the corner. I got out of it, but yeah, it happens. So to conclude then, these are my 3 parts. You're planning the day using the weather, terrain, yourself. The hike and fly day split into 3 parts, which is the start, the most important part, the middle bit, the flying day, and that's your go fast section, and the end of the day when you're planning for the next day. Caution on fatigue, keep eating and drinking just to keep yourself mentally and physically fit. Allow yourself to rest if you need to, and be cautious about boxing yourself into the corner on the waypoint bagging races where no goal equals no points. And finally, UK hike and fly training. If you think that it will be of value, please do join us. It's a good team of guys that we've got all over the country, all the active hike and fly pilots who are coming together to help us put this together. So if you'd like to contribute as well, please let us know. So I think that's me done, and it's going to be over to Bud now, and he's going to be the one that's going to give us all the important information about the X Lakes. Bud, are you there?
I'm here, mate. Thanks very much for that. That was really in depth. That was awesome, mate.
Cool. Right, we've got 1 minute left on this meeting, so it'll be worth me stopping it. This is why I accelerated at the end, because I saw the clock moving. If I stop this, I'm not sure if I can restart the same code. If not, I've got another one to share on the X Lakes group, and everybody can click on that, and we'll just start the next meeting, which will be another 40 minutes. Cool?
Cool.
Cool. Right. Okay, I'm going to hang up on this one, and then we'll get going again with Bud on the next.